Hello and welcome. This is Art Fuel with the Cloud Native Apps Business Unit at VMware. And today, this video, I'm going to go over some common troubleshooting steps if you have any deployment issues while you're doing a PKS deployment, or the same sort of steps apply for Bosh and Harbor, or any sort of tile that you might deploy through PCF Ops Manager here. And so I have actually ran into an issue earlier on a template. On a deployment. What happened is I just misconfigured a value, and that caused the deployment to have an issue. I had to go back and update the configuration and redeploy. So it's a pretty straightforward thing. And the steps I'm going to show here apply. It wouldn't really matter what value I misconfigured. We're going to look at this. We'll see the specific error I made, but really the steps to actually look at the error in the log, go in and find more details and get access to the full logs are common steps to any sort of type of deployment issue you'd see here with Ops Manager. So I'm going to go ahead, and I can see there that was I had a failed deployment earlier, and it's going to show me the log. And of course, usually these go in sequence from top to bottom in the order which they were applied. So errors usually apply, or you usually find your errors right down towards the bottom of because it'll exit out once it finds the error state. And now we can see task 95 is the task number in Bosh. So it's, again, the Ops Manager is sort of a dashboard that operates you put in information into Bosh, and it makes a really nice little web user interface to make the data entry simple, and OpsMan then turns around and gives that information to Bosh to actually go out and execute those tasks for us. And so these logs that we're looking here, these are things that Bosh is orchestrating your deployment steps that it takes. And so to get a little more detail on task 95, we're going to want to go ahead and go into Bosh. In the lab, CLI VM should be configured to where you can just go in and start typing Bosh commands. I actually didn't have it in the lab guide when I went through there, but I've added to the lab guide since. Either way, you don't really need it, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to show how to do this using Ops Manager itself, because you never know if you're working in an environment, doing an implementation, helping support somebody, you may or may not have your jump box ready to go that has the connectivity that you need. And so one of the great things is Ops Manager does have the Bosh client associated with it, are already pre-built into it, and it's when you deploy it, it's almost always in it needs to be in a place where it has access to the other VMs on the control plane. So it's a great place to access Bosh, and it's kind of perpetually there if you're ever in a pinch and you need to get somewhere that you can execute Bosh commands without having to download and set up things first. And so the first thing we're going to do is come in here to our CLI VM environment. I'll make this a more moderate size here. And we're going to go ahead and SSH into our OpsMan, using the actually we can do this directly from PuTTY, so I don't need to jump through CLI VM to do that. So I can go into PuTTY, and I should already have a session here. The username to log into OpsMan through SSH is Ubuntu, so go ahead and click on that there, and that opens up our Ubuntu at OpsMan SSH session. Oops, I wanted to minimize that, not maximize it. Make this one a little bit bigger here. And VMware 1 bang is a standard password here. And now I'm just going to do a sudo -i here as well, so we don't have to worry about this. VMware 1 bang again is the password. And once we're in here, the next thing we'll need to do is we'll actually need to set up the local environment. The Bosh client is pre-installed in here, but it looks for some local environmental variables to be present to identify your specific Bosh implementation. And you can actually really easily find those in the Ops Manager here. So just gotta scroll to the top of this page, and we'll go back to our installation dashboard. Have a different deployment going while I'm recording this video, with that. We're trying to access Bosh, right? So we're going to click on this Bosh director for vSphere tile and go over to the credentials. And we can see right down here Bosh command line credentials. So we'll grab those. And what we see here, in between these quotation marks, we don't want the quotation marks, we'll just take all the stuff that's inside of them. These are the environmental variables, and anywhere that has a current Bosh CLI client involved and has the access to get where it needs to, right? It need to be, in this case, you can see we're going directly to this private network address for Bosh. So Opsman, it does have a direct network connection to the PKS management network subnet. So this will work great from Opsman here. And we can come into the Opsman bash prompt and export these and hit enter. And now we can do commands like Bosh deployments and see the deployments that Bosh is managing in our environment, right? And we can also, I believe that was task 95, but let's just click back here to get back so I can verify what that task number was. Here we are in our change log, and it was all the way at the bottom. And we can see, yes, task 95. Now, I already did this earlier, so if I look in my directory, I think I actually saved them in a different folder. So, yeah, so we're good. This is nice and clean, and we can look at the logs here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Bosh task 95. And we can see here that it says review logs for failed jobs, PKS NSX-T-OSB proxy. Now, when we we'll download the log files here in just a second, but this is let me make this window a little wider here. This is pretty handy because there's actually several different log files. This tells us now that the issue that we're encountering has to do with the NSXT OSB proxy for Open Service Broker. And it also tells us where we need to go to look for the log output. And so before we grab the logs, let's just click that Bosh deployments command one more time, because this was a error with the PKS deployment, and so we know that. So we can see here, we see there's a Harbor tile registry, a Harbor container registry deployment, and there's a PKS deployment here. Later, if you're once we start installing Kubernetes clusters, those will show up here as well. Right now, these are the only two deployments that Bosh is managing. So what we're going to do is highlight that, and we're going to say Bosh tasks -D for deployment and paste in the name of our deployment. And I'm sorry, not Bosh tasks, excuse me. That would work. This would show me all the tasks that are associated with that deployment. But in this case, I'm actually looking to get the logs. So we'll go ahead and do Bosh logs right there. Okay. And now if we look in our local directory, we see this pivotal container service, blah 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 blah, with a long. This is just downloads the latest batch of logs from Bosh, and I'm going to actually untar that into a new directory. So let's go ahead and make a directory for this, because later we may, if we continue to experience this issue, we may need to re-download a new batch of log files. So it's good to keep them in an organized fashion. And I'm going to go ahead and actually move. I guess I don't need to keep the tarred version of the file, but I'm gonna move it into this directory to keep it organized, and then we'll untar it, and then we'll cd into this directory, and now I'll tar-xvf, and what that's gonna do is just gonna unzip this, untar it, right? So we'll see the individual folders, and we saw it just unzipped a lot of things. So now we can do an ls here to see all this stuff. And so there's a bunch of different logs, as you can see it keeps, and as we saw from our the error in our task, we can go to this PKS NSXT OSB proxy directory, and there's a few different log files we see in here. Okay, and we can see our standard error, and we can see the standard error for the controller, and also the standard out for the controller, and standard out for the standard proxy log. And so and what you do here is it's not so specific usually, I don't think, to tell you exactly which of these 4 to look into, but this gives you the smoking gun here. And keep in mind, these logs are specific to this as a deployment, and so they're not going to be huge logs. So we can, I believe I already looked at this, and I think it was in this log, so let's just go ahead and cat this. And yes, we can see here that it says error getting network manager for cluster, and it says the certificate is valid for the address, not the name, right? So that is a pretty big smoking gun there. That pretty much tells us exactly what's wrong, and that is exactly what was wrong. When I set up the Bosh tile property, actually, I'm sorry, in this case, the PKS tile properly, right? Because we're looking at the PKS deployment. And so in the settings for that PKS tile, I had put in NSX Manager as the host name for that environment, which again is a good practice, but when I generated the certificate, I actually generated it with the IP address and not the host name. And so while host name would generally be a preferred way of doing it, either way works. And so the resolution in this case, if you if we come back and we go to, scroll back up here, I've already actually resolved this issue. I'll show you what I did. So we can go into our installation dashboard here. Actually, I meant to say change log. And we can see here that I had a PKS deployment that failed, and then afterwards I had that PKS deployment succeed. And the difference in the change that I made there, if I go back to the installation dashboard, what I did is I went into my enterprise PKS tile, I went down to the networking section where we define our NSXT manager connectivity. And it was actually this value here. I had the host name set as NSX MGR-01A, and I changed that. And then after I change that, click Save. You go back to the installation dashboard, and then you go to Review Pending Changes. And right now, the Apply Changes is grayed out because, as you see, I have a different deployment running. I'm installing Harbor in the background, but again, that's not related here. After I made that updated that IP address, I clicked Apply Changes here, and then it ran through the deployment again and worked fine. So that is, for most deployment issues, you may not even need to go that deep, right? A lot of times the log files that are right here in the change log will give you the smoking gun, but if they don't, that's the easy way to get into Bosh command line and start looking at log file values. And the last thing I'll mention while we're in here again is if we look at Bosh deployments again, sometimes you may need to get into one of the VMs. In this case, the PKS deployment has one VM. So one of the nifty commands that you can do in here is Bosh SSH, and we'll do -D for deployment and enter our deployment number. And it was already certificate authenticated to the PKS VM, and so now we have we are directly inside of the PKS VM. And one of the great things about this, whether it's a PKS VM or a different Bosh managed VM that you're looking at, is this monet command. Monet summary really shows the key processes. I got a sudo -I to be able to see that, right? So we'll do monet summary, and if you're ever having any issues with the PKS API not being responsive, or other issues here that may be a little different than mine that you have to troubleshoot a little bit more, you're coming in here to these VMs, whether you go into Bosh itself or whether you go into another Bosh controlled VM, they all have this monet feature here. I can quickly see, are these processes running, and if there's a process, whether it's running or not, and we think it has some issue with it potentially, you can always do monet restart. And in this case, I could say monet restart and whatever the name of the process is over here. So I could say restart PKS API, or I could say monet restart all, and that's just a super useful command if anything ever gets stuck. You usually don't have to go that far, but that's about as far as I have to go for 99% problems. And I work on this stuff in lab environments that are super oversubscribed, and you're not the ideal environments to work on this all the time, and so this will get you through, I think, most of the problems you might encounter during PKS deployments. Thanks for watching.